Okay, this is my cell phone number. You can text me now with questions for Scott Jennings. Scott may be one of the most recognizable political commentators in the country, but his is a uniquely Kentucky story. Born in Princeton, raised in Dawson Springs, Scott graduated from the University of Louisville and the McConnell Center for Political Leadership before beginning a career that would take him from Kentucky politics to presidential campaigns, the White House, and ultimately to a national audience. He served as special assistant to President George W. Bush and has spent decades now working at the intersection of politics, communications, and public affairs. Most people see Scott today in his role as a senior political commentator on CNN, where his analysis and spirited exchanges have made him one of the more recognizable and familiar voices on CNN. Also hosts the Scott Jennings Show. It's a great name, Scott. A nationally syndicated weekday radio program heard on hundreds of stations on the Salem Radio Network. You can add best-selling author to his resume. His first book, A Revolution of Common Sense, How Donald Trump Stormed Washington and Fought for Western Civilization, became both a New York Times and USA Today bestseller following its release last year. Scott and his wife Autumn live in Prospect with their 4 children, their 4 young boys, and about 30 chickens? 35 chickens, okay? Scott's a founding partner of Run Switch Public Relations. And I should point this out before Scott comes up. Go ahead and make your way up here, Scott. An important communications partner for us, more importantly, a real ally in helping us tell the cooperative story and making sure the voices of the people and communities we serve are heard. Scott speaks to audiences across the country, but his Kentucky roots have remained an important part of who he is, and his perspective brings Kentucky to the national conversation. Please join me in welcoming Scott Jennings.
Well, thank you all very much for having me here this evening. It's wonderful to be with all of you. This is saving me from getting yelled at by 5 or 6 people at the same time, so this is better, I can assure you. Joe, thanks for the introduction. Many of you may not know this. Joe Arnold's my best friend, and I spend a lot of time with Joe, and I see behind the scenes how hard he works on all of your all's behalf. Oftentimes I call Joe and want to talk about the St. Louis Cardinals, and he waves me off. I'm doing co-op stuff right now. Stop bothering me. So, Joe, thank you for your friendship, and thank you for your work on behalf of the organization. Chris Perry, thank you for the confidence you place in us. And Mr. President, it's an honor to be part of your organization. Benny, Mr. Chairman, thanks for having us here. And Nancy, congratulations on your award. My children spent a good chunk of the summer on horses and fooling with our chickens in the backyard. And I hope that their love of horses and animals leads them to a life of community service the way your upbringing did. Another round of applause for Nancy. She's a treasure for this day. And I want to thank everybody who's involved with the co-ops for the invitation, and thank you for the work that you do for the Commonwealth. You keep the lights on. And I imagine that you all are also the people who get blamed when a squirrel makes a bad decision near a transformer. Most people don't spend much time thinking about electricity until they don't have it, or your kid sticks his finger in a light socket. You flip a switch, the lights come on, the refrigerator runs, the air conditioner hums. I mean, as long as you don't live in Europe, the air conditioner hums. Life continues. Most people don't see the planning or the investment or the maintenance or the dangerous work or the lineman who leaves his own family in the middle of the night because somebody else's family needs him. But the story of rural electric cooperatives is about, to me, much more than just electricity. It's one of the great American success stories. There was a time when much of rural America was quite literally in the dark. The large utilities looked at the distances and the terrain and the number of customers, and they said, this is not worth the trouble. Rural communities were considered too remote, too costly to serve. But the people who lived in those communities did not accept that fate. You formed cooperatives, and you built something for yourselves. Neighbors helping neighbors. It's deeply American, and it's deeply Kentuckian. And I think that same spirit of service and community continues to define rural electric cooperatives today. You go where others may not go because you believe every community, no matter how rural, deserves the opportunity to thrive. That includes the homes where we live, the farms that feed our families, feed our country, the schools that are educating the next generation, the churches where we worship, the small business that form the backbone of local economies. Every day, you deliver something without which modern life is impossible. You deliver power. And power is about more than what travels across a line or lights a home. You know that at its core, power is about people. The power to build, to create, to make decisions for ourselves, to shape the future of the community in which you call home. I've thought about the word power quite a bit over the last year because I've spent much of it traveling the country. I've been appearing on television, radio stations, doing this book tour in front of audiences across the country. I've been in 40 states, I think. And as was mentioned, and as if some of you have, I wrote a book called A Revolution of Common Sense. I signed a few. Joe gave me a great list. Congratulations if you got one. I was looking at the list. Al Cross's name was on the list. I signed it for you, Al. I said, just what you always wanted, a book with Donald Trump on the cover. I knew. Go right on your bookshelf. I didn't choose the name by accident. In fact, I'll tell you why I chose the name. I was sitting on the set at CNN on Inauguration Day last year, and the president said, we're going to have a revolution of common sense. And I turned to Van Jones, and I said, that'd be a great name for a book. And he said, please don't. So I called the publisher and pitched him my idea. I said, I think we're living through a political revolution. But it's a revolution that most normal Americans don't consider revolutionary at all. Pretty simple. Americans want to have a say in their own future. They want leaders who trust them. They want institutions that work for them. They want solutions that are grounded in the reality of their everyday experience. Secure the border. Make government work for taxpayers. Produce energy enough to keep our lives moving, keep the costs down. Don't let bureaucrats run every detail of your life. Don't apologize for the greatest nation the world has ever known. Put the interests of the American people first. In Washington, these ideas these days are sometimes treated as radical. Around here, we generally, call it any other Tuesday. But writing the book gave me the opportunity to spend time with the president and the people around him. When you write a book about Trump, everybody has the same question. What's he really like? The answer is actually very simple. Behind the scenes, he's very much the same as he is on television. There is not a quiet or restrained book club version of Donald Trump. He has opinions about everything: politics, television, buildings, polls, golf, the media. I can assure you he has opinions about CNN that I've not yet shared with my colleagues. When I first met him, I'd been talking about him on television for almost 10 years, but after I decided to write the book, I thought, well, if I'm going to write a book about the first 100 days of this term, I should go get his cooperation. So I made an appointment, but I didn't really know him. He knew me from TV, I knew that, but he didn't know me. So I made an appointment and I went over there and opened the door, and I expected to see the president, but gathered in the Oval Office was the entire cabinet, a lot of the senior staff, and he's conducting a meeting. This is very early in the term. And he looks up from the Resolute desk and he says, You look terrific. I mean, you look good on TV, but you actually look terrific. Have a seat next to the other Scott. Besant, the Treasury Secretary, who's the other Scott in my household. So I plopped down on the couch, and I didn't exactly know what I was getting myself into. He was conducting 6 meetings at the same time. He had Besant and the economics guys talking about different issues. He had Rubio and Witkoff, and they were talking about the Middle East. And he had 6 meetings going, and I was watching all of this unfold, and then the door flies open. And this kid comes running in, and he says, "Mr. President, I have bad news. They are still using paper straws in the White House mess." They must have not gotten my order. He had literally just signed an executive order banning paper straws. I thought to myself, I don't know who was running the country the last 4 years, but I know who's running it right now. But all this is going on, and he finally remembers that I'm sitting there, and he says, "Does everybody here know Scott? He is like our best guy. He knows how to defend me without getting fired, which is no small talent." And then, "To be honest, Scott, you used to be a little bit average, but then I came along, and now you're terrific." You can read all about the rest of it. It was quite a journey. Beneath the humor and personality of the president, there is something that I learned that I think his critics have consistently failed to understand. He possesses an instinctive connection to people who believe that the institutions of this country have stopped listening to them. He understands that millions of Americans do not want to be managed by Washington. They do not want to be condescended to by the media. They do not want to be told that their values are obsolete, that their communities are backwards, and that their country is something that they ought to feel guilty about. They want somebody to notice them, to fight for them, and to treat their concerns as legitimate. That's the real story behind the political revolution going on in this country. It's not merely the story of one man, although he is currently the president. It's really a story about millions of Americans reclaiming a voice that they believed had been taken from them. A great many of these people live in rural America. And I've had this extraordinary privilege of trying to tell that story at least the first 100 days of this term. The farther I've traveled on this tour, though, I've found myself thinking more and more about where I started. It's difficult to explain what it feels like to sit aboard Air Force One to staff or interview the President of the United States when part of you is still a kid sitting in a school in Dawson Springs, Kentucky. Dawson Springs is not a place from which people were expected to wind up working for or interviewing the President. Nobody looked at me on the Little League field in Dawson Springs and said, "There goes a future CNN commentator." In fact, some people who watch CNN today still aren't convinced I should be a CNN commentator. But that's the great promise of rural America. Extraordinary people can come from places that the wider world barely notices. Talent is not confined to New York or Washington or the large urban areas. Ambition does not recognize county lines. Potential can be found in every small town and at the end of every country road if we give people the tools and the opportunity and the confidence to pursue it. Dawson Springs, like many of the towns in which you live, was a place where people expected you to work. They expected you to keep your word, to show up when you said you would, to respect your neighbors, and to understand that you are not the center of the universe. It's a place where people know each other. If you did something good, everybody heard about it. If you did something stupid, everybody heard about it faster. And growing up in rural Kentucky taught me lessons that no university or campaign or television network could ever teach. I did not grow up with a master plan to wind up in the White House or on CNN or on the radio every day or to write a book about a president. My journey was a series of opportunities and choices, unexpected turns, hard work, generous mentors, victories, defeats, and moments where somebody just decided, I'm going to take a chance on a kid from Kentucky. My first paid campaign was for George W. Bush in 2000. And then I got to work in his White House, a high honor that I still think about almost every day. I had the privilege of learning politics from Senator Mitch McConnell, one of the most consequential figures that Kentucky has ever produced. I've worked on campaigns across the country, winning some, losing some, although like every political consultant, I prefer discussing the winners more than the losers. But eventually the road landed at CNN. And my job there is sometimes described as political commentator. My children describe it as dad getting yelled at for an hour. Either description is accurate. On television, you sometimes get about 22 seconds to solve all the problems of the world. Someone asks a question about an issue that's been dividing the country for years. 6 people begin talking. A commercial break approaches, and somehow it falls to me to restore national unity before the Viagra ad comes on. It's an unusual life, but I take the responsibility seriously. When I'm at the table, I'm not there to just merely offer another political opinion. We all have them. I'm trying to represent millions of Americans who watch these national conversations and wonder whether anybody involved has ever driven a gravel road, attended a county fair, raised an animal, balanced a small business payroll, or waited 3 days for the right part to show up at the Tractor Supply. I'm trying to represent people who love their country without embarrassment, who believe that faith and family still matter, who work hard, who pay all their taxes, who obey the law, and all they ever ask is that their government demonstrate the same basic level of responsibility that is expected of them. I've come to believe that I did not reach this national stage in spite of being from rural Kentucky. I think I've reached it because I am from rural Kentucky. Rural America teaches you to distinguish between what is fashionable and what is true. It teaches you that common sense is not simplistic. It is accumulated wisdom, and it's earned through work, family, faith, failure, responsibility, and living with the consequences of your decisions. People who work with land and weather and machinery and animals and energy and tight margins cannot afford to live their lives entirely in theory. Reality eventually sends a bill, and that perspective is needed anywhere where important decisions are made by people who will never personally experience the consequences. After all the campaigns and elections and interviews and television arguments and book events and miles, I've learned a few things about America I want to share with you. The first is that this country is much healthier than the national conversation makes it appear. If you watch nothing but cable television, and if you do that, please stop. You might conclude that all Americans hate each other, that our country is but 5 minutes from collapse. Now, I work in cable television, so you have to understand, we're paid to make 5 minutes feel like 3. Conflicts are loud. Outrage gets a lot of attention. Anger generates clicks. But that is not the whole country. It's not most of the country. You travel around our country, and you find something different. You do find neighbors helping neighbors. You still have parents showing up to volunteer at schools and to coach children who are not their own. Churches are feeding families. Communities, as we well know here, are working together to rebuild after storms. And you see linemen leaving their homes in terrible weather because somebody a few miles away needs their power restored. That's America. In fact, that's the real America, not the collection of angry clips assembled for television, but the millions of quiet acts of duty, service, kindness that holds this country together every day. America is not primarily what happens in Washington. It's what happens in the places that Washington rarely sees. The second thing I've learned is that rural America must never apologize for itself. Rural Americans are sometimes discussed by my colleagues as though they are a problem to be solved, a population that must be managed, modernized, lectured to, or rescued. I reject this completely. Rural America feeds this country. It powers this country. It serves in our military. It preserves our traditions. It raises children who understand responsibility. And it supplies a disproportionate share of our national common sense. My view is that rural America is not a museum exhibit, nor is it a relic of the past. It is essential to America's future. The coming years will demand more American energy, not less. Artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, data centers, electrification, national security will place enormous demands on the electric grid. The people in this room will determine whether America meets those demands. Your mission began with bringing electricity to communities that others had written off. And today, you're helping those communities compete in an economy that no one could have imagined when the first cooperative lines were strung. The third thing I've learned is that institutions survive only when they remember whom they serve. The greatest crisis facing American institutions is not merely incompetence. It's forgetting the customer. Government forgets the taxpayer. Universities forget the student. The media forgets the viewer. Political parties forget the voter. And large corporations even sometimes forget exactly who is buying their products. And this is what sets you all apart. You know that cooperatives cannot afford to forget the member, because in your case, they live right next door to you. You were built around a powerful proposition. The people being served should have a voice in the institution that is serving them. There are quite a few institutions in America that could use a refresher course in that lesson. Service requires humility. Leadership is not about elevating above others, but about becoming responsible for them. In a world where politics and media make it easy to confuse attention with importance, I think the measure of leadership is more simple. Did you use what you were given to serve something larger than yourself? Which brings me back to the work that all of you do. Somewhere tonight, at the end of a country road, there is a child doing homework beneath a light powered by one of your cooperatives. We do not know what that child will become. Farmer, teacher, nurse, dean, governor, senator. Maybe some of them will become something we can't even imagine today. But our responsibility is not to predict what children will do extraordinary things. It is to make sure that none of them is written off because of where they begin. That is the real meaning of the word power. It is not merely something carried across a wire. It is the opportunity that is created at the other end of it. It's the farmer who can operate modern equipment, or the small business that finds a way to keep the lights on and the doors open, the student who's finally connected to the world, the family who doesn't have to move away, the town that competes for the next big thing. I've seen America from some remarkable vantage points. From the White House, from campaign headquarters and television studios, from the window of Air Force One. I've seen a great deal of it through the window of a rental car while trying to figure out why the GPS has taken me down a road that hasn't been repaved since the Carter administration. But I have never seen anything that made me believe that the heart of America resides in Washington, D.C. The heart of America is still found in communities where people know one another and depend on one another and show up for one another. It's found in places where handshakes still get deals done, where people gather after storms, where Friday night football and church suppers and county fairs are not quaint traditions, but institutions that give your community an identity. I learned that in Dawson Springs. I see it in your cooperative communities across the state. I see it in the spirit represented in this room tonight. The people who first built rural electric cooperatives had no guarantees they would succeed. They just believed that neighbors mattered and that communities deserved a future. Every generation inherits the same obligation. Our job is to leave the country stronger than we found it, to defend institutions that work and to repair those that do not, to preserve the values that sustained us while embracing new things, new technology that will carry us forward, to make sure that children in rural Kentucky inherit not merely electricity, but genuine opportunity. We should never allow anyone to convince us that America's best days are behind. We are, after all, the people who crossed a continent, lit the countryside, defeated fascism and communism, split the atom, landed on the moon, built the modern world, and continually renew the promise of liberty. The next great American achievement may begin in a laboratory or a factory, a farm, a classroom, or at the kitchen table of a modest Kentucky home at the end of a lonely country road. And when that moment comes, there's a good chance that one of you in this room will have made a decision that kept the lights on. So my message to you tonight is to keep building and to keep serving, to keep listening and keep believing in the communities that everybody else overlooks. Keep the lights on. You never know who may be sitting beneath one of them, dreaming of a place that no one expects them to go. Thank you all for what you do for rural Kentucky. Thank you for the faith that you place in your communities and our Commonwealth. God bless the cooperatives in the United States of America. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Scott. We have time for a few questions, if you don't mind having a seat here next to me here. About maybe 3 months ago, I called Scott and I said, Scott Jennings, do you believe in the Constitution? Of course. I said, do you believe in the Bill of Rights? He said, yes. Like, what are you getting at? I said, do you believe in free speech? I said, yes. That's good because you're giving one on August 10th at the Marriott downtown.
Oh, I laugh because it hurts so much.
That's right. I don't know if Scott knew that or not, but yeah, that was a free speech. All right, I have several questions, and I should point out, by the way, there is a CNN mobile satellite truck that is pulled up outside of the Marriott because Scott has to be on Caitlin Collins at 9:15. So we are going to be on time here and ask the questions that have been texted.
And here I thought I was getting out of it tonight, but I have to go get yelled at by David Axelrod in 30 minutes.
That's
so
right. Okay.
We'll do it.
So here are some questions that have been texted to me from the folks here in the room. With political polarization at an all-time high, what do you believe is the single biggest issue Republicans and Democrats could realistically work together on over the next few years?
Well, the first one really ought to be the Farm Bill, which needs to pass ASAP. And I have some hope that it will pass this fall. So there's step one. If you're looking for an immediate issue, that has to happen. And the second issue really is longer term, but we have to come to some national agreement about what we're going to do about these data centers and the electricity generation and how we're going to handle this as a country. Right now you have states and communities across the country that are coming up with really a hodgepodge of laws, executive orders, and pronouncements about what to do here. I'm not sure all of it is rooted in good solid facts or data. Some of it's rooted in politics. But to me, whether we win the AI war and whether we win the war for our energy future, we need a little national conversation, a little leadership on this, and it would be devastating, I think, to this country if it just becomes a political football to be punted back and forth instead of a conversation about what's the best thing for America.
Next question for you that's been texted to me. I didn't write these questions. These are texted. Who would win a cage fight between Scott Jennings and Chris Cuomo?
I mean, that's a great question. I'm not on as many steroids. I don't know. He's mean. I got to tell you. I don't know. He works out more than me. But I'd like to think my IQ would allow me to find a way to defeat him rather quickly.
Okay.
It's funny, the Cuomos come up a lot. I mentioned I have 35 chickens in the backyard. I assume many of you raise chickens. We got some chicken farmers in here.
Raise your hands if you're a chicken farmer.
Yeah.
Anybody? Okay.
Many of you will know that if you're raising chickens, you should never get a rooster. And we accidentally got one once, and I learned some valuable lessons. One is they actually crow all day, and the other is that they constantly sexually harass their coworkers. And for that reason, we named our rooster Governor Cuomo. This lasted for about 2 weeks. You should have been there when we impeached the governor. Anyway, the Cuomos come up a lot in the Jennings household.
That's quite a euphemism when you impeached him. Okay.
We did.
Why is there so much infighting in the Republican Party when they have a chance to make a difference?
Well, there's infighting in both parties right now. I will just be flat panel honest with you. The main source of the infighting in the Republican Party right now, this is just based on my review of having been in 40 states over the last 12 months. The first, last, and middle question I've been asked at every event is, why don't they pass the SAVE Act? That has been asked of me. I have not been to an event. And a lot of the infighting goes right back to that issue. I mean, the answer is very simple. They don't have the votes to pass it in the Senate. And this has frustrated people mightily, and it has led to a lot of infighting. My personal view is it pales in comparison to the infighting going on in the other party right now with the sort of takeover of the Democratic agenda by these socialists. I mean, they're going to nominate a lady in Wisconsin Tuesday night who thinks we should cancel Thanksgiving. And to me, their problems far outstrip the Republican infighting right now. I'll tell you, too, my experience in politics over the years, when you have the White House, you can sort of keep it under control. Even when I worked for President Bush, at the end, when we were very low, when you have the White House, you can kind of keep it under control. But when you don't have the White House, your party can get really divided up and really factional. I see that happening to the Democrats right now, probably more than the Republicans. We'll see what the midterm elections bring. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not convinced yet that the pundits are quite right about this. But this will really come to a head in 28 for both parties. Replacing Donald Trump, not an easy job. And figuring out the direction of your party when you're going to have 2 or 3 avowed socialists running against people who are more traditional Democrats. These are major questions that will determine the pathways for both parties, and there'll be primaries, and there'll be a little fighting in those primaries. I'm as fascinated as you are to see how it turns out.
Speaking of the White House and President Trump, we have a question. Depending upon the outcome of the midterms, do you think Donald Trump may not finish his term?
No, I don't agree with that. I think he'll finish his term, and will want to have a pretty strong hand until the last minute of the last day of his term. He certainly is going to want to have an influence over what comes next. So I think he'll be around.
Back to the president. This question is, your book was based on Trump's first 100 days of his second term. If you wrote the book today based on the last 100 days, would it be different?
Yes. I mean, it would almost entirely be dominated by Iran. That wasn't going on in the first 100 days, but this last 100 days, I mean, the first part of this year, since the war started till today, largely dominated by Iran and all of the consequences of that. You know, whether that's gas prices or just the consumption of his attention. In the beginning, in the first 100 days, you know, he was doing a lot of stuff. In fact, I talked to a journalist who covers Trump for my book, and she said, he's doing so much we don't know what to cover. He's overwhelming us. And that was, but this last 100 days, yes, other things have been going on, but it's largely been dominated. So I don't know what books are on the horizon, but this year has been almost entirely consumed by the war and the foreign policy issues that have flowed out from it.
Okay, rapid fire round here at the very end. Where's Todd Blackburn of Meade County RECC? Todd texted me. I'm going to have to call you out for this one, Todd. What's it like being friends with the Joe Arnold? Do you have any good stories? I did not write this question.
Well, many of you know Joe recently broke his leg. And I'll tell you what it's like to be friends with Joe Arnold. When he broke his leg, and you know, he and I are both great St. Louis Cardinals fans, and I immediately had visions of taking Joe in his hobbled state to Busch Stadium and be immediately given better seats and better access to better parking. And so I planned a trip to pull this off. And we got there. He's not wearing a leg brace. He doesn't have a cane. He doesn't have a walker. He has nothing. And he's like limping around, but without any of the tools that would allow me to prove that we should sit closer than we were. So I admired your pluck, but this didn't help me at all. But we're glad you're feeling better.
That's about right. Someone's asking, what's your favorite pie?
Oh, gosh, blueberry.
Okay. How many, Scott, many women are wondering, why are you so, this is actually, you texted me this.
Oh, yeah.
He did. That's terrible.
Well, you put it on the board. I
did. That is true. Well, we're going to end it right there. I don't like the text from Scott. Listen, you're a good guy. Appreciate your friendship. And Scott has been on our side for the co-ops since day one, and I appreciate you so much. Go outside and do your live hit with Caitlin. You can follow that on there. Please join me in thanking Scott for being here this evening.
Thank you all.